diving right into today's conversation, we are going to be talking about investing in growth. And so on the line, we've got Shaiza Rizavi and Katharine Zaleski will be moderating today's conversation. And so quickly, I'll run through their bios, but Shaiza Rizavi is a managing member and portfolio manager at Gilder Gagnon Howe Co. Please excuse me, a New York-based growth equity brokerage and investment management firm dedicated to individual investors. Ms. Rizavi serves on the board of trustees of the American Museum of Natural History, the Calhoun School, the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, and Acumen. And as you heard from our last introduction, Katharine Zaleski is the president and co-founder of PowerToFly. And so with that, I'm going to hand the mic right over to both of you, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, hello. Okay. Can you see me? Can you hear me? I'm still here. Okay. Hey, Shaiza, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you, Katharine? So nice to see you.
Yes, I know. We haven't actually seen each other, but we've talked on the phone. So, you know,
lovely to be here.
It's good to see you on the other side.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. One thing Nicole didn't mention is that you're actually an investor in PowerToFly as well. So very, relatively significant to our conversation today because we are also a risky business. Not as risky as we were when you invested in us, but I want to talk a little bit about how you sort of evaluate risk in privately held small businesses as well. So and then just the larger concept of risk. Right, taking on risk. But before we get into that, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. And I love this quote from Jacqueline Novogratz, who runs Acumen, which you're on the board of, where she says, Shaiza is interested in everything around her instead of being focused on trying to be interesting. And so I just think that's such a wonderful way of summing you up. But how did you really grow the ability to be interested versus trying to be interesting? Because it definitely is something you have to, it's not, people aren't born with it necessarily.
I mean, I think, that's it's an interesting question by itself. I think in many ways, even when I first met you and we talked about PowerToFly, you held that pretty closely in the way that you learned about me and experienced the world. But I think a lot of how you walk through the world is really dependent on where you started and who the people around you, how they influenced you. And my parents were both born in India, and they left India and headed to Pakistan during partition, during a war. And I was born in Pakistan, and my father was given an opportunity to come to America when the states were accepting doctors, and the idea that he would come in a World Health Organization fellowship and his family would follow 1 or 2 years later. And so we were all set to move to New York, where we had a little bit of a family system. He was at New York Hospital as a cardiologist. He was invited to come and move over. So we all packed out. We sold everything in Pakistan to head over to New York. And last minute, the whole cardiology group left New York Hospital and moved to Evanston Hospital in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
And all I think it's interesting, those types of pivots where we grew up. I worked in my dad's office. I saw everything from great news given of babies were going to be born to really difficult news, and observed how he built up a practice, how he started to think about taking care of people in a new country, in a new context, in a new way. And, I worked there, and then I went to college and I worked at the public defender service through college. So in my first years, I worked on death penalty cases where there's so many assumptions, I think, made of when you and I are having a conversation, and the gap between us are a lot of assumptions and how we hear the words and how we actually contemplate what we mean. I walked in as 18, 19-year-old to work with one particular death row inmate and had all kinds of assumptions, but really started with asking questions because it allowed me to understand where he came from in a much better way. So I think partly all of these different experiences and pivots has always placed me in a place where I'm not necessarily walking into a situation where I completely know. Like when I moved here from Pakistan, nobody really knew where it was. When Russia went into Afghanistan and a war started between them, everybody suddenly had Pakistan on the map. And
Right.
so that assumption of, I had to be interested in thinking about how people viewed the country by asking questions and understanding what their perspective was, and then thinking about how that might alter mine and what my perspective is. And so
Mhm.
I think part of it is by circumstance, my situation was altering a lot. So I didn't necessarily walk in with the belief that I knew exactly what the other person was thinking, because I was discovering and had to have a sense of curiosity because I was unsure. And I was learning because they were all new environments. And that has served me well, even in many of the different rooms I've walked into where I don't really know. So I walk in a little bit more tenderly and gingerly, trying to figure out what's going on. And after a while, it becomes who you are. So
Yeah.
maybe it was circumstance, but it certainly is. I'm curious about the people and wonder about the people who are in the room.
Right. Right. Well, I thought there was an interesting thing I read about you, maybe in because you went to Vanderbilt and you did an interview with them about how you got into your business career, and it was through asking questions in a class, right? And then the professor said you should maybe go into working in the markets or
Right,
investing in
right,
the
right.
markets.
Wow, you did your homework there, Catherine.
Yeah, well, yeah, I.
Um, so I actually, yes, I came back. I was living in Southeast Asia and I had been working, combating child prostitution, working with street children and child laborers. So I walked into business school and it was just initially fish out of water. There were a lot of people who had known that they wanted to go into finance since they were quite young, had gone to Wharton or 2-year banking programs. That wasn't at all where I came from. And I wasn't even supposed to be in this class. I basically was waiting in line. I ran something called Students for Responsible Business, and I was waiting in line with my friend Terry talking about a conference we were setting up. And he was so excited interviewing for this class called Security Analysis. There were all these people waiting, and the professor was going to take 10 people, and he was really hoping he was one of the 10, and he always wanted to be an investment advisor. And so I just waited with him. And then I talked to the professor for a few minutes, and then I was put in the class. And I was, it seemed like a vocabulary, new way of doing things. I wasn't sure it was going to be right for me. But then when that happens, you work 10 times as hard, or I did, because I wasn't sure that I could do it. So I was trying really hard to prove to myself that I could. And I was given the gaming industry, and I pitched a stock that I thought would go to zero. And you would have an auditorium and it would have people in it who would come and observe. And then people from Wall Street would come and grill you on the stock that you were pitching. Mm-hmm. And I ended up really giving what I thought was a strong thesis. I'd worked for a long time on it. And the founder of our firm, Richard Gilder, I'm a stockbroker now, and I work at a firm where I've been for 25 years. He loved the stock that I was pitching. It was his largest position. He had a 12% position in it, and just thought they were going to change the gaming industry, the slot machine industry.
Right.
We disagreed. And I think partly I ended up in the job because the two of us had completely different points of view. We met each other in debate. We clashed in a big way. And it was real. Like, it was really two completely different sides of the ring. And I think the reason that I ended up working so closely with him probably was because it started so truthfully from the beginning, that we said a lot of things to each other that we felt, but maybe you would have had a bit of a filter and not to say them. But because it started in the spirit of debate with a well thought out idea for each of us, it was really an incredible way to stumble upon a mentor who then really helped to develop much of my thinking.
Yeah. I mean, he died recently, but he was a huge deal and probably a very intimidating person for a lot of people. So it's a great story. I actually have a similar mentor story with a guy named Ken Lair, who is one of the pivotal people in starting media companies, including Huffington Post. And I don't know why, but at the age of 23 years old, when I started working with him, we were always sort of debating things. And then he would always tell me, you need to listen to me. And actually, as I got older, I left to go work for the Washington Post, and then came back to work for him. And I was way more polite. And he kept sort of being like, why are you so polite with me now? Like, I sort of been trained in a bigger newsroom and in a bigger organization. And he was like, I hired you back so that we could get into debates about, about things. And obviously you have to listen to what I say because I'm the boss, but I want you to debate me and tell me why you think something's wrong. So I'm just curious, like how you get into those. I sort of fell into that a little bit because of the environment I was hired into, but building that muscle, I would love to hear your thoughts on it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as though when I was having the debate, I was completely sure of myself. I was really concerned that I was wrong and perhaps what he was, his point of view was correct, but I wanted to stay in it with him. And I think there is this way of building muscle where if you have a really good mentor, something that he did for me, which was helpful, even in that first interview, even though I didn't know it was an interview, in that first conversation we had, he really stressed all the mistakes that he had made in his life. Like he would stress the fact that he had been down 70% in 1970 in the market, or that, and he would discuss the pain of getting up again when you had failed miserably. And slowly that was building muscle for me. When he was telling me through storytelling, the power of storytelling is really telling me all of these different ways that he'd been able to get back up when things were difficult. That gave you an opportunity. It really allowed you to maybe take a chance and say what you were thinking, realizing that his approach to whatever he emphasized to me, whatever he was telling me about, was filled with mistakes along the way. And I think there are a lot of ways where, our firm wouldn't be standing if people didn't help out. Like when he was down 70%, he would tell me the story of the landlord in the building said, I know you've been dodging me and you can't pay your rent, but take a smaller office on the fourth floor without windows until you get your act together. You're a good man. And let's just make sure that you get through this. To have those people, the little fairy tale characters that help you along the way. I think that I've had a lot of those. I think he had a lot of them, and it seems like you certainly have as well. So
yeah,
because people help you and tell you their own stories, and it builds into your stories, and that layering effect leaves you amplified in some way.
Yeah, and we're surrounded by positive stories that don't talk about those steps, those painful steps beforehand. So
yeah,
I try to remind myself of that as someone who's, I used to read the news about other women-run businesses out there and say like, what am I doing wrong? And but you never heard the full story. So one day I'll publish the full story, which I think would be very edifying.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I think it is true that he used to say you work hard for 20 years, you get rich overnight.
Yeah.
And it appears that way. And all that's really happening is you're getting beaten up along the way, but you might have a thesis, you might have an idea. I mean, I see that in stocks all the time. It takes a really long time to be able to have your thesis either turn out, or sometimes you didn't define the market right, or it doesn't go the way. But mistakes have to be a very strong part of the journey, and your tolerance for building up that muscle has to be a part of it, because the feedback loop that gives you is what helps you then be able to, in that next step, go and try again, maybe a different way, maybe realizing that the mistake you make won't repeat itself in this circumstance. So it gives you a little bit of a deeper toolkit.
Yeah.
A lot of acumen, or the work we do at Acumen and in Acumen Academy, training people, entrepreneurs, to think about how a social enterprise can be set up, and building the muscle of listening to the markets and allowing yourself to pivot when you think you're wrong, all of that. There's training. And I think sometimes people think it just happens naturally, but it doesn't. It's a lot of hard work, and surrounding yourself with a cabinet or people who can help you think about when you're at your lowest. And, the years where I've done so poorly in the market, everybody has a fun time investing when I'm doing well, but, when you're doing really poorly, it's hard to keep getting back up. But I can remember the lessons from Dick. I go back, I read his old letters, and it really shines a light on how many problems the world's been through. And we think this time is different, but it's usually not. It has that same feelings associated with the difficulty of the failure and the loss. But
yeah. I find great comfort in reading biographies.
Me too.
I try to do that for about 30 minutes every morning. Right now I'm reading about the Sackler family, so it's a bit different, but but I just read Eleanor Roosevelt's biography. a new one. And a lot of it is about, it's mainly about failure, but when we hear about FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, it's usually the triumphs and not what took it there. So, and then to your point too, like the other thing I do now is every interview at PowerToFly when I interview someone, it's usually someone gets to me after they've gone through about 6 other interviews. I tell them the story about how the company really, was almost in a lot of trouble and the journey from there. And then with the expectation that, we're going to talk about this and talk about our mistakes early on if we're going to have a good relationship and build this thing together. So
and it is, I mean, it's important. Like I go back to my initial interviews in that way. And those lessons, like I can remember when I was told, the biggest problem we see with you is that you went to business school because of that. I guess you would call it an expert mindset that comes out of it and lack of humility at times. And so he's like, you have to unlearn all of that and actually realize that this is a place where you'll have egg on your face 75% of the time. And you'll pick a good stock once in a while, but you'll try many and they'll fail. And then you'll have to face clients when they're unhappy and still tell them at the beginning that that's going to be part of the journey so that lifeline, the trust is built right from the start.
Yeah.
I think that's, it's all about learning. And I feel like so much of it in the activities that you do or the activities that I do, it's a lot of stumbles that help. But there's also, I think the myth is that life's supposed to be easy, but like 90% of it is the struggle. But, as like Jacqueline Novogratz's book or Martin Luther King said, it's sort of a beautiful struggle in some ways. So.
Yeah, certainly. All right, I'm going to encourage everybody to bring in questions. I see like 53 of you in the chat box right now, so I know you have more questions for us too. And a lot of you out there in YouTube land, they're going to come right to me, so please ask them. Oh God, is that my phone? No. Awkward. Okay, sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about risk. Like, do you have a rubric for risk or some sort of tolerance? I mean, how far are you? Because just from my own personal, when I'm thinking about investing in things and what I'm willing to do, and I don't know, let's take Bitcoin, for example, which is pretty relatively accessible through apps like Coinbase right now. How do you look at something and say, well, I'm willing to put this much risk into it versus not? So.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think oftentimes it enters, before I have a client come and open an account, I do a client interview. And I think I do talk about risk in the client interview, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about risk when I'm investing. I'm really thinking about the return or the upside. Mm-hmm. And the idea that oftentimes in looking at risk, if you're looking at a completely new industry that is defined by a historical, traditional way of looking at it, then you could move toward this new company and it would feel very risky if you use the yardstick of the past. Mm-hmm. But if something is not yet defined and you're hoping for possibility in the future that maybe this company could actually help in human flourishing or do something in a different way, there's not yet a measuring tool that would allow you to understand the risk associated with investing in that. So in looking at the growth of it, there's the idea that if you looked at many companies in the past, when Facebook came out, what industry would it be? And how would you really be able to think about what the risk is associated with it? Or when Amazon came out, thinking about it as a CD or a book company, you could never have imagined all the mistakes and the pivots and the feedback loops that would lead them to where they are right now. So a lot of times, why I love my job is I get to dream about what the future would be like. And in that dreaming can start to think about what I think a company can earn over a long period of time. And if those earnings are outsized enough that I could see it being up 10, 15 times, not afraid of the risk of it being down 10 or 15%. Because if it could be up 10 or 15 times and I could actually come up with a possibility of that and come up with earnings that I think could actually warrant it to be up that much, then I can stay with it and have conviction when it's down 20%. because it won't happen overnight. So a lot of it will be, if I'm in that journey for the next 10 years, like I will see that there's some stocks that have done very well for us, but there were bad stocks for many more days than there were ever good stocks. But it's sort of that get rich overnight, or what you've seen with PowerToFly. You struggle, and then suddenly something works,
Right.
and it really takes off. And you wouldn't have been able to call the moment or understand exactly how it would happen, but you know there's something there and you're moving toward it. So I kind of think that if you are thinking about an entrepreneur and what they can turn it into, you spend time with them, you get to know them, the conversations lead to places that are unexpected. And then you see how big and different this idea might be, and whether there's potential to have scale and leverage and create something that's never been done before. And that's where it gets pretty interesting, because you're focusing on the upside.
Right. So you're a futurist in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely try to stand in the future and think about, if I were to invest today in the future that I'm imagining, what would I want to invest in now?
Mm-hmm.
And that means that, right now in our world, we're moving from a physical world into a virtual world, but we haven't yet, even though we might have the passport to go in and out of the virtual world, we haven't yet built the FDA or the EPA or the systems in place in this digital world. So how will that work out? What will actually happen in that? So that might be a lot of brainstorming. You've had a year of working from home, but also getting your healthcare through telemedicine, getting your education in this way. So there's so much that's changing right now. And much of what I try to invest in is change. So if I'm noticing that change and then can notice something that can have an outsized return, it's really an incredible journey thought of consideration of where we could be in 10 or 15 years. And that's when it gets really interesting. And that's why there's such a possibility of being wrong, because it's not happened yet. It's not defined. And like, what industry, if you were to take some company today, not that I'm interested in it or invested in it, but like if you took a company like Tesla and you thought about it, I'd heard on the radio that its market cap is bigger than all of the car companies combined.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really think of Tesla as a car company.
Right.
It can get energy from my house, but my house can maybe get energy from it. And it certainly has software, and it has, so there are all these other ways to think about it. So what are the definitions, and what is the yardstick, and what is the tool, and what matters?
Yeah. No, I think that's the best way of looking at finance and investments, because it's very exciting, and actually involves some real research and thinking about these larger problems that everybody's trying to solve, or not everybody, but some people are doing better than others. How do you educate yourself on this stuff? It's a very broad question, but do you have a process where you get up in the morning and you read certain publications, or how do you get your mind future focused, for lack of a better phrase?
I mean, there's not a very specific day-to-day routine. I have consultants that we use all over the world. I have a team that I have a call with every morning, but we have conversations all day long with companies and people living in different countries, and try to bring on guests quite often who will push us and we push them. And so part of it is just constantly, back to the beginning, the question of just having a sense of wonder and trying to understand what's happening, knowing that you don't know. Mm-hmm. So the humility to understand that none of us know what the future will look like. So I'm a seeker, and I'm really trying to search and seek out what pieces of information will resonate to help me understand the puzzle pieces fitting together to create some sort of a vision of what the future could look like. So and much of my life feeds in, like my work at Acumen, or even the Museum of Natural History has a sequencer. That sequencer was bought a long time ago and started to teach me about what it meant when you could sequence the genome. And then that led me to think about, what does that mean when disease changes, and therapeutically, diagnostically, what does it mean when you can actually begin to not have one big category, like blood cancer, but start to break it into very specific leukemia or this, you start to break things down and get much more nuanced when you have more information, and processing speeds have gone up as much as they are. Digitization allows you to share information. Decentralization allows you to. So it just is more trying to get out in the world and access people and thinking that'll push yours. And then you hopefully are able to benefit others by improving your thinking too. And it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's great to remind everybody out there of the long view, because there's been so much press recently about the short view on stocks and all this Robinhood stuff, and people making money, people losing a lot of money. So,
I mean, I think, I don't know if most of, but a good amount of Wall Street is about preservation of capital. That's not what I do. So because I'm not trying to preserve capital and I'm trying to think about the growth industries, whether it was Carnegie or Rockefeller, Mellon, Morgan, those growth industries really were the industries that built much of the country. And I think the next growth industries, I don't know what they'll be, but that's the fun of searching for them. And I don't have any money where someone's saying, can you just hang on to it for me? Just make sure it doesn't go up and down too much, because I'm going to swing for the fences every time.
Yeah.
So
it's, well, you're making me want to read a lot more about and think about the future while looking at the past. And it's very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're already, from the work that you're doing and the way that you're thinking about how workforce development and how people can be trained in forums like this, it's already thinking about, with the questions that come out and with the needs that you're seeing that your company is able to take care of for people. I feel like there's already such a powerful dynamic in conversation. So you walk away with pieces of it every day. And it's interesting to see where it takes you. So I don't know how it resonates for tomorrow, but on my call, if I bring it up on my call, it then starts to percolate with others, and like popcorn, you're getting ideas going and you start thinking, and it really leads to good models, hopefully, with lots of earnings potential.
Yeah. Well, this year has certainly been a race into the future. I think there's two things that really changed the world. It's pandemic and war, unfortunately. And so that's what we've seen, obviously, in the last year. Great. Well, we're almost at time, and I want to just ask you to go back in time and give yourself a little advice from when you started out your career. So
I think maybe thinking about how, no matter what stage I was in life, I sort of had to, and maybe it was part of coming from Pakistan and knowing I didn't know, but walking into the classroom as a little girl and trying to act like I'm confident. This idea that you need to know. And there is a bit of an anti-expert mindset, I think, in me now, where maybe I didn't have that when I was younger, like trying to hold on to what your principles might be, but like not trying to be right, but trying to do the right thing. So that then lets go of like holding on like this, trying to figure things out, because you can relax and allow it to happen. And then with the patience of that, whether it's like I invest patient capital, that's Acumen does too. Like we think about patience and capital, but patience in ourselves, to think about it's important to act based on what you think might happen, but knowing that there are going to be a lot of failures and struggles along the way. And that's okay, because you're not an expert. You're just trying to get through the day learning just like everyone else. And so then that humility allows you to give yourself a break and not feel like you just did it all wrong, or you're not like the story. You were talking about how you read about the women entrepreneurs and you're on your, you're staying in your lane, right? And you're building something that's not been built before. Right. And that's not going to be easy. So I would tell myself to like give myself a break in that thing.
Oh yeah, no, it's
deep breath, right?
Yeah, deep breath. So, well, this has been absolutely fantastic, and I know that people were really enjoying it in the chat as well, and we had some good questions. So, thank you, and I also know you're very busy, so really appreciate your time.
Of course, thanks so much, and talk to you soon.
Okay. Yes, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to both of you for such a fantastic conversation. I remember our first diversity reboot back in June of last year when Shaiza spoke with Jacqueline Novogratz, and it was really incredible. So very honored to have had the opportunity to introduce her here today.